Safe Assign. Safe Assign is a program that helps make sure that students aren't plagiarizing. That's why they're safe. It's kind of silly. Very good. Mostly yesterday I just sat at home. I didn't do any of the things I usually do because of the roads.
Very bad. Very sudden.
Well, we were supposed to get tons of luscious, wonderful snow. Instead, we got more of
Rain.
Yeah. I got to see things on the roof.
very cool. Very cool. With the weather, though, did he fall off?
It actually wasn't all that much about it, but on the roof. Very interesting. A lot of metaphors.
That's true. That's true. So does Tevye's wife love him? That's they've lived all that time together, but they've never even discussed it.
At least the answer wasn't no. That would have been sad.
Kind of interesting. Makes you wonder if people that live in what we might call the lower classes are capable of love.
I mean, probably just an assumption, but I say.
I mean, there's love and then there's love. I mean, there's affection. That's like the way you feel about your favorite slippers, you know, and your children. Quoting C.S. Lewis, right? Refers to that as storgy. And pets. So pets and children, basically no difference.
I know people that love their pets more than their children.
And then there's philia. Philia is friendship. I think we could definitely have that no matter what social class we're at. But then there's eros. And eros, the way Lewis defines it, is not just liking sex, basically, which I think an awful lot of contemporary Americans think of as eros. Lewis, I think, beautifully defines that as a fetish, as opposed to true love. Because just loving the act is not loving the person. But for it to be true eros, you have to love the person as philia, as a friend. And then that mutual attraction can also become a sexual love. But only then would it be true eros. But in that sense, it seems almost like there's a kind of a degree of the kind of love that people can have, and that the higher their own self-consciousness, understanding of themselves is, that the higher then. Although it strikes me, have you ever read Ian McEwan's book on Chesil Beach? That was interesting. It's a novel, but it takes place in the 50s after World War II is over, of course, in England. Right? And what you have is a young couple that basically grow up and meet one another in school, and they fall in love, they think. But the neat thing about the book, and it's really short, you could read it in an evening. In fact, I think I read it at Barnes & Noble's and never bought it. I read it while I was sitting there in the comfy chair, you know, the one you torture yourself in. Comfy chair. It's the Spanish Inquisition. Sorry. Mental illness, right? If you're not familiar with the Spanish Inquisition, you get tortured in the Spanish Inquisition by comfort, because they believed that happiness was asceticism, so a comfy chair is a torture. But so the interesting thing with Chesil Beach is as the narrator, you have what's it called, the narrator that sees everything, right? I forget what that's called.
The all-seeing eye?
Omniscient point of view, yeah. Same thing. so you get the author knowing that these two people, and you hear them talking with one another, and you hear them understanding one another, and you realize that they don't understand one another. They think that they do. But you knowing, right? Different than Harry Potter. Like Harry Potter, you're always seeing things through Harry's eyes. So when he makes a mistake, so do you, right? But with Ian McEwan's book, oh, they're totally misunderstanding one another. They think they've fallen in love, they get married, they go on their honeymoon on Chesil Beach, and the very first night, they have a nice dinner together, and this is a typical kind of like bed and breakfast place. Well, it's a restaurant too, but so they go for a walk on the beach, they come back, and now it's the time, right? And they get into bed, and they do what they think they're supposed to do. And an interesting question, they look up, and there's one of those covers over the bed. What's that called? One of those
Canopy.
A canopy over the. And while they're looking up, the new wife looks up and says, "Why is there a stain up there?" Remember, this is a honeymoon suite, right? Sorry, don't choke. Are you okay? Okay, I won't explain. That's all right. Good book, though. But I end up coming away with the conclusion that when women are educated the way men traditionally were and want to have careers, as a role, they move away from being women and become men, which then makes it impossible for them to have the kind of love that is married. Which is kind of intriguing. And the couples that I know that were students of mine and have gone on to get married and have lots of children, the wife did not plan on having a career. The wife planned on having children. That was one of their goals, was to have children. After the children, then they kind of pick up a career, but clearly they're intending to have years spent taking care of children as a mother. And an awful lot of my students, as they graduate, it's very, very clear that they move right off into careers and they don't have children. It seems pretty clear they don't have that same kind of married life. They're two professionals living together, but they're not husband and wife. Does that make sense? Didn't plan on talking about that at all. What brought that up?
I brought up Fiddler on the Roof.
You brought up Fiddler on the Roof. Thanks. You have me wondering. Donna and I planned on having children, could not figure out how to do it, but we're able to buy 4 children anyway. Adoption. It's a terrible thing to say. You give them money, they give you a child. Now what? So. Sorry, that wasn't very funny. That's serious stuff, actually. If you think about it, educated women tend to have fewer children. Even like a fraction of a child, which makes it really amazing. How do you have like 1 1/3 children? You see just like a pair of legs walking around. So in modern societies, educated women tend to have so few children that the population is not replacing itself. It's actually going down, except for emigration. There's women that are culturally not interested in education, until they become acculturated. So it drops down a generation after that. So you've heard all that, I suppose. You wonder, so why is that? Well, it's because women don't want to have kids. child takes an awful lot out of you.
But a child is a career.
Well, but if you even listen to feminists, they actually.
No, let me be quiet. I was just.
Oh, no, I know what you mean, you know, and clearly that's the way, you know, my wife and I treat it. That was her career, her job was raising the children. But when you think about it, you know, a child competes for your wealth and your time. So they really use up a lot of your resources. So if what you're interested in is your own personal happiness in life through stuff, through opportunities, through interesting things to do, a child comes in direct conflict with that. So, and that's his fault. The whole conversation is his fault. But a really interesting conversation. Okay, so today, even though the syllabus says we're going to continue to work on categorical statements, I would like to move on to the next chapter because that's where most people have the most difficulty. And I think, does everybody feel pretty comfortable with the basic idea of how categorical propositions work? AEIO statements. Okay. So, let's move on to page 218, chapter 6. And this is the part that's testable. So that's why I like to have some extra time at it, because if it turns out that some folks have difficulty with it, we can spend more time until they get really comfortable with it. When we're ready for the test, notice on the syllabus I have a practice test. So what we'll do is literally do the exact same kind of test in class together and make sure everyone feels comfortable with it before we actually do the test. So everyone should be able to feel really comfortable with the test. Remember, the test is open book, open notes, open conversation, although don't interfere with others that are actually doing the work because they know what they're doing. It's just hilarious, I suppose. But I want everyone, of course, to get an A in the test, and I want you to feel comfortable that you know how the system works and so on, because it's an important system. It's probably one of those reasons why the elite are the elite in the first place. Over more than 2,000 years, they've been learning this. So how does it work? So looking at what a syllogism is, notice the first one that's introduced on page 218. All comedians are shy people. Some comedians are good actors. Some good actors are shy people. So what we have are three categorical propositions, right? So a syllogism, you can't have an argument with just one statement. Dogs are dumb. That's totally not an argument, right? Cows are smart, horses are dumb, right? That's not an argument either, although you might make your own conclusion and then complete the argument. That's fairly natural. So you might argue, well, if cows are smart, horses are dumb, that suggests then that cows are smarter than horses or something, right? So you can have an argument only after you have three categorical propositions. So you need three. And the first proposition, in ordinary speech, you can arrange them however you want. And the first task, really, of the person understanding someone else's argument is to recognize which of the three propositions is the conclusion, right? And the conclusion is the one that's implied by the other two, right? So you have two premises and a conclusion. They could be arranged anyway. And by the way, you can also actually not state one or the other of the premises or the conclusion. It's called an enthymeme. Remember, and that's psychologically very powerful because we can finish it. So if I say all terrorists are evil, Saddam Hussein is evil. No, I meant Saddam Hussein is a terrorist. You conclude. What's the result of that? Saddam Hussein is evil. Sorry, everyone. You get the idea. I don't have to say what's so logically obvious. You can automatically complete it yourself. Most people with all their ears working, right? I mean, by the way, that's one reason why I think an awful lot of people, roughly 25% of the people in Alaska, do not get jokes. It's because their logic circuits are screwed up because of fetal alcohol or something of that sort. And they're basically not repairable, even with manipulatives and things of that sort, if you think about it. So roughly 25%, which is also very close to our prison population, the in and out prison population. Argued with people, that, like the one counselor at the Matsu prison, I think it was, and literally arguing, I was saying, all the ones that are in prison are mentally ill, everyone. She says, no, because the way they have to categorize them, this, a prisoner that has mental illness has to be treated. And that's, by the way, very expensive, right? Once remember, Reagan era, we cut back on mental hospitals. Yes?
Well, why you say all prisoners are mentally ill, though?
Because they all break the law to get there. And I would, pardon?
Some people are there because they do break the law, they're just falsely accused.
Oh, yes, that's true. That's true. I don't mean them, obviously.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I agree with him too. I mean, all the people that are in prison that deserve to be in prison
Are mentally ill.
are mentally ill because they broke the law, and in my way of thinking, mental illness should be defined by someone that breaks the law.
What if the law is unjust?
That's
So you
certainly
have a
true
duty to
too.
break
I
the
mean,
law.
our most famous example of that, of course, is Martin Luther King Jr., the letter from Birmingham jail, right? And slavery and so on. But that gets into how justice is interpreted over time, and we've clearly evolved our sense of the good and justice, so that what we think of today as justice with regard to who deserves what, obviously we don't think anyone deserves to be property. But if you go back to John Locke's arguments, which were the essential arguments that Thomas Jefferson were using, if a person is officially property, then they can't be a person. They're property, right? So if you become property because of, like, mostly the definition was war. So if I capture you in a war, and in that war I'm legitimately allowed to kill you, but I decided not to, I captured you instead. Theoretically, Locke says, I can kill you at any time, because I had the right to kill you, and it's my decision not to kill you, but if I change my mind, I can. And it's still the act of war that persisted over time, right? But if I capture you, right, you're not a person, you are now my property, because I have the right to kill you if I want, but if I find it more profitable for me to use you for something, that's my choice.
How is that logical, though?
It was considered
Says who?
absolutely
Like-
logical at the time.
It still makes no sense. That's just like how they said black people.
In fact,
3 black people was equal to 1 man back in slavery time. Like, that makes no sense.
Was it 3 or 2/3? 2/3.
That makes no sense.
It made sense only, well, what happened was the southern states were way outpopulated by the northern states.
Right.
But if they were allowed to count their slaves as people, then they had more votes in the way the Congress would be arranged. But the northern states refused to accept them as people, because then, of course, the southern states would have a lot more votes. So they compromised. Slaves were 2/3 of a person, but didn't get to vote. They were counted as 2/3 of a person.
So it was all for nothing. If they couldn't vote in the end.
Well, what's curious, by the way, is most countries throughout the world still today have slavery. So we're the unusual, England was first. We're unusual that way, that we basically, and actually from what I read, we have more slaves in this country than ever. But it's a black market kind of slavery. There are people that are brought to this country, they're illegal means, and are kept basically imprisoned one way or another. Children, sex slaves. There's actually, according to one statistic I read, there's more people that are living a life of basically slavery. I'm not talking about like wage slavery, like working for Walmart or whatever. That's a whole other thing, right?
You're talking about bondage and being
Right.
held against your will.
The odd thing is that the original slaves that were used in the New World were Irish. And the interesting thing was, but the typical lifespan of an Irish slave in the New World was 4 years. They usually didn't make it past the point where they could like buy their freedom. And most of them didn't anyway, right? But so most of them were dying before that. And then when the black slaves were brought in, they realized the black slaves lived longer. You could work them harder. They were much better slaves. They lived longer, and you could get a lot more work out of them, so the black slaves became much more valuable than the Irish, and the slave trade switched. One of the neat things in the one book that I read called White Cargo was that one of the first slaves was owned by a black man. It was an Irishman. Black man owned the white man. So that's kind of interesting. They know the name and everything of all that. He was a farmer, I think, in Virginia, but I'm not sure. Did you read the book, White Cargo?
I didn't read the book, but I've heard that story.
Yeah. So kind of, but we still have people owned by parents sell their children into slavery to make money in some countries.
Oh.
So the odd thing is the point where Western Europeans decided that everybody needed to be free as a person. But why? Turned out it was cheaper.
War.
It was cheaper than owning them as slaves.
And they needed soldiers.
If Walmart had to pay for the housing and health care and food for all of their employees, they couldn't afford their wages. Hiring employees and paying them piffuless pay is much cheaper than actually owning a slave. All that's pretty interesting. Shoot, that wasn't your fault. Whose fault was that? Not part of our.
Well, I guess it was kind of Max's because he brought up the law
Yeah,
might not be.
yeah. And I brought that all up because I was basically arguing that the logical structure of these arguments are, I think, obvious to people whose minds are actually at least functioning properly. So it's one way of identifying someone that's not. I mean, that's clearly part of the testing procedures that they go through in order to identify if a person has fetal alcohol spectrum, where they have problems, what kinds of issues they, and by the way, why they don't notice that jokes are funny. So if you know you've met folks that don't get it and don't laugh, and the clearest way of knowing that is when they tell a joke to try to be part of, you know, like, so everyone's telling a joke, and you can laugh. When you see other people laughing, you can laugh too, even if you don't get a joke, right? So they're chameleons in that sense, right? But then they feel obligated to tell a joke, and they tell a joke, and they tell the joke, and then they laugh, and we're all looking at them like, that wasn't funny. Where's the joke in that, right? Of course, some people can't tell a joke. You heard about the guy that went to prison. And the first night, he was scared to death what was going to happen. You know, he's in a cell with a roommate and a cellmate, right? And as the lights went out, different individuals would yell out a number, 46, and everybody would laugh. Another guy would yell 33, and everybody would laugh. Another person would yell 15, and everybody would laugh. So the next morning he asked his cellmate, what was that all about? He says, oh, well, we've been here so long, we've heard all the jokes. Instead of telling the whole joke, we just assign each joke a number. So the next night, it started again. All these different numbers being yelled out and everybody laughing. He decided he would try it. So he yelled out, 17. Nobody laughed. A few more people yelled out numbers and everybody laughed. And finally he yelled out, 63. Nobody laughed. And then others started, telling out numbers and they all laughed. And quit, right? But the next morning he asked his cellmate, what? I tried, what happened? His cellmate looked at him and said, some people just can't tell a joke. So we have a premise. How do you spell premise? With an E or two S's? How does the book spell? With an E, right? So we can arrange them in actual practice any way we like, and we do chain them together even, which is called a sorites. But to figure out the actual form of the syllogism, because there's a specific set of, so we have 64 what are referred to as moods, and we have 4 figures. So we end up with a total of 256 possible syllogisms. So to figure out which ones these are, we arrange them in a specific way. We start off with the major premise, then we have the minor premise, and then we have the conclusion. That wasn't very good, was it? Shoot. So the conclusion is always going to be of the form S is P, where the subject of the statement is the minor term, and the predicate of the conclusion is the major term. And so what we have to find first is the conclusion of the argument. Once we find the conclusion, we know that the subject term of the conclusion is the minor term of the whole argument, and the predicate term of the conclusion is the major term of the whole argument. And the major term has to be in the major premise, and the minor term has to be in the minor premise, right? But in both of these, you could have the major term on either side and the minor term on either side. And what goes on the other side is referred to as the middle term. So we will have 3 terms in an argument: the major, the minor, and the middle, right? Now, there can be 4 figures. We use this little device to remember them. So figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4. And they're arranged by the way the middle term shows up. So if the middle term is here or here, it's figure 1. If it's here and here, it's figure 2. If fits here and here, it's figure 3, and it fits here and here, it's figure 4. Notice the conclusion is always SP, 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 right? So major premise, minor premise, which means that if it's figure 1, the major term, the predicate of the conclusion goes there, or here, or here, or here. And the minor term goes here, or here, or here, or here. Notice that's just a pattern where you have all 4 possible arrangements. So the first one, middle term is here and here. Second one, it's here and here. Third one, it's here and here. Fourth one, it's here, right? And the mood comes from the type of statement each is. So if I have an all statement, and I have an all statement, and I have an all statement, A, right? And if I pick then figure 1, will be all middle is major, all minor is middle. Therefore, all minor is major, right? Which you could see very easily if I have the minor, or if I have the minor term is middle, and the middle term is major. You can see if it's in this set, and this set is, and it's true that this set is in the middle term set, right? Then the middle term is in the predicate, and it's obviously the case. It must be that the subject is in the major, or that the middle, or, sorry, the minor is in the major, right? Now, that's not actually how we will diagram these, but you can see just how easily that works. And so that's AAA, figure 1, which also has a name. It's referred to as Barbara. Barbara. Barbara, by the way, is the divine argument. That's why it's always, it's the very first one that we always pick out. So it's the best argument. Notice this is that form where if you fill in, right, so all terrorists are evil. Saddam Hussein is a terrorist. Therefore, Saddam Hussein is evil. Right? Plug in anything. You know, if an ape, what do I want? An ape is a monkey, right?
A baby is a human.
Well, I want it to be an ape, right? So if an ape is a
That's what we
monkey
came from.
and a orangutan is an ape, we call that, right? Orangutan is an ape, so therefore an orangutan is a monkey. Those are true, right? Notice it's a valid argument. The premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. It was a mathematical relationship, right? But let me pick a different kind, a different syllogism, right? I'll keep it figure 1, but I'll change it to III. III figure 1. So now I have some. Some M is P, some S is M, some S is P, right? This is the weakest argument you can have. And here's one of the reasons why, right? This is, instead of, having a blank here. Distributed, it's undistributed, right? So it's undistributed, so both terms are undistributed in I statements. So all of my terms are undistributed. So I'm giving you the least possible information possible that there is, right, in an argument form. If I try to diagram this by putting, do it this way. When I grew up, we always did it so that it looked like Mickey Mouse, right? You know, so if you go like this, it kind of sort of looks like a Mickey Mouse, you know, with the 2 ears. But I think he uses, as a diagram in the book, puts it this way. So what I'm now looking at is, here's my minor term, here's my major term, and here's my middle term for an argument. Now, if I'm diagramming this particular argument, I'm saying some of my middle term is predicate term, so here's my middle term, and some of those are in the predicate, which means that I have at least one, so I have to put an X in here. But where does it go? It could go here, it could go here. I don't know, it's ambiguous, so I have to put it on the line to indicate that I don't know where it is, even though it has to be in this section. And I look at the second premise. Some S is N. So some of these have to be in here. They would have to be in this section. But again, it could be either here or here, and I don't have information telling me which side it's on. So I put an X on the line. We do not diagram the conclusion, because the reason for our diagram method is for us to see if you diagram the premises, if the conclusion is also given, right? So now I can look and see, is some S P? Is that given? Well, it would have to be somewhere in here for there to be an X that indicates that it is both S and P. But neither of these are in there. They could be, but I don't know that. So it's ambiguous, so I don't know. So I do not know if this is correct, even if these two statements are true. And so this argument form is invalid. It's too weak. Doesn't give me enough information to connect the middle term to these two so that I could see that they are giving me the conclusion, right? This particular argument form, I1, is invalid, and by the way, the reason it is invalid is because the middle term has to be distributed in at least one premise. And in this particular argument form, it's not. Am I boring you to tears? I can dance. Tradition. Da, da, da. Let's do another one. By the way, the easiest way to get these right and do them quickly is to memorize all of these steps. So memorize the types of moods that you can have. So A, E, A. Let's try A, E, A. Pick a number.
Hey, our number.
1, 2,
One.
3, or 4? 3. 3?
1.
I can't give you 13. I'll do 4 first, right? AEA4. By the way, it's going to be invalid. This is going to be a bad argument. It's not going to work. But let's write it up. See, so we've got an A statement first, E statement second, A statement third, right? And it's figure 4, which goes this way, right? With the this, and this, right? You can easily memorize these. So all P is M, no M is S, all S is P. Middle term is distributed there, although it's undistributed there. No problem. Major term is distributed there. The minor term is distributed there. And here, I have the minor term distributed, and this is undistributed. None of that is a problem. Right? So, let's use the diagram method to see if it's a valid argument or not. I know it's not, but why? It's invalid because whenever you have a negative premise, you must have a negative conclusion. But so here we go. All of the major term are middle. So all of the major are middle. So I'm going to diagram it like this. Notice how this works. In this particular case, I have so it's all P is M. So if you remember the diagram method from the last chapter, it's an A statement, right? So here's my subject on the left, here's my predicate on the right, and I fill in this whole area because it's saying that all of the P is also M, right? Remember, you could also put that little red X in there if you want to use the Boolean system, but we don't have to do that. Right? So notice, in this particular case, I've taken this diagram. So if you imagine me pulling this off the board and turning it like this, see how it goes? You see how it just turns so that I'm using exactly this diagram. You use exactly the same kind of diagram for each A, E, I, O statement every time. But in this particular case, the major premise is going this way. All of these are also in here. So this is how it looks, right? Okay, the minor premise now is an E statement, right? And says no M is S, right? So I diagram that this way. So if I take this, pull it off the board, turn it so that I have it exactly here, I fill in this section. See how I did that? Easy. Now, I've diagrammed the two premises, and I just want to look at the conclusion on the diagram to see. Remember, I'm not going to draw the conclusion, because if I drew the conclusion, it would always look like it was a valid argument. I'm not really testing the premises, right? But what I want to do is now look at the conclusion and see if it's already given. And that would say that all of my S is also P. Well, for that to be the case, I would have to have this area completely blackened, and this area, one of these two sections, be where all of the minor term could possibly be. As a matter of fact, in this particular case, it looks like you couldn't possibly have any of them in the major term. So as you can see, this argument would fail miserably. Let's fill in and see. Let's see. All dogs are musicians. Right? No musicians are scholars. So therefore, all scholars are dogs. All dogs are musicians. No musicians are scholars. So therefore, all scholars are dogs. No, that's just totally wrong, right? By the way, notice what would happen is if I change this to no, scholars are dogs. So now instead of AEA4, I have AEE4. Now it turns out to be valid, right? In fact, what's really cool about this whole system, since there's 256 possible argument forms, and you could easily diagram them all, and over the last 2,000 plus years, we certainly have diagrammed them all. We actually already know which ones are valid and which ones are not, which is why we have the names for the valid forms. And if you look in the book on page 246, notice you have all of the modern and traditional interpretations listing the valid forms. So, and if this is figure 4, so if I go down the 4th column and I see AEE4, notice that's one of the valid forms. And I think, by the way, the name for it is comestris. I should look that up though. Never even turned on my machine. Probably won't work. Should I look these up? Is somebody else on the web? You want to look up the names of the syllogisms? And look up AEE4, see what name it is. I think it's comestris, but I might be wrong. Does it give it to you already? Everybody there? Is this neat? By the way, if you're doing a term paper or a thesis, and you do all of your research, and it's an interesting topic and everybody loves it, and you present it, and you've got all the data, and it's interesting, but then somebody raises their hand and points out, but your argument form is invalid, you're screwed, right? Because it's a terrible thesis then. You put all that effort into it, did all that research, wrote up that beautiful paper, but no one pointed out to you that your argument form was invalid. So everyone's just going to ignore it. It fails miserably, right?
What did you say that one was?
This one, I said it was comestris. What is it?
That's AEE2. This is Camines.
Ah, Camines. Okay. I don't have them all memorized.
It's understandable.
I've tried. I don't even have all my names memorized in the class. I'm getting old. On the other hand, whiskey seems to help. I mean, not too much, right? You know, just one shot a night. It's supposed to help. I attended a conference this weekend at the Egan Center on diabetes. My wife has type 2, whatever. My daughter has type 2. My wife keeps trying to convince me that I have type 2, but the doctor says no. But because she keeps pushing everybody, he did give me metformin, so I'm on metformin, which is for type 2. Wives are like that, you know. You should treat him for it. Well, but he doesn't have it. Well, you should treat him anyway. Okay. You know, doctors are. She comes in with her list. Check his toes. Oh, he has toes. Okay. I don't have any of the thing, you know. Well, remember, that's pretty neat, because I canceled all my insurance policies, figuring, hey, I don't want to be worth more dead than alive, right? And it works, because ever since I did that, my wife has done everything possible to keep me alive, which is what I wanted. You know? you take out an insurance policy, you're betting that you're going to die sooner to win, right? Why would you wanna do that? That's just silly. I'm planning on living forever, actually, and so far, so good. So what was the one that you wanted to use, one?
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you about the thesis again.
Uh-huh.
What did you say about how can I tell if it's wrong or not?
Analyze the argument, just like we're doing here. So if your conclusion was all dogs are musicians, no musicians are scholars, so therefore no scholars are dogs, that would be a valid argument form, right? But now we're going to do AEA1. Automatically, you already know that this argument form is invalid because we have a negative premise, but we have an affirmative conclusion that breaks one of the rules. You cannot do that, right? But let's take a look at it.
Can we do this one? Can I say this right quick?
Go ahead.
Ideas of enlightenment in the 18th century goes back to one happening. That one happening was the rocket that was known as science and the scientific worldview. So can we? Can we do that?
Is that a valid syllogism?
Well, that was my thesis in the paper I wrote this week.
Oh, well, give it to me afterwards,
Okay.
because we have to format it correctly. Okay, so A, E, A. Now I want to use figure 1, right? So figure 1, I have to switch these two. And I have to switch these two. Nope, I had that right. So I have all M are P. All M are P, so there's no members here. No S is M. So therefore all S is P. Is it given? No, there's possible members over there, so it's not given. If it were actually given, then this whole area would have to be filled in, so that all of your possible members of S were here, where they're also P. So this is invalid, and again, it's invalid because I have a negative premise but an affirmative conclusion, right? Pretty easy. So what were your three statements? What?
I said ideas of enlightenment in the 18th century goes back to one happening.
All ideas of the 18th century?
No, ideas of enlightenment. You remember the Enlightenment period?
Right, but you said of the 18th century.
Yeah, so all ideas of enlightenment in the 18th century
Okay.
goes back to one happening. That one happening was the rocket that was known as science and scientific worldview.
So they were all science.
And scientific worldview.
That's okay. And then second premise?
That was that. What else? What else am I supposed to know?
So all ideas are scientific worldview, and then that science was what?
Secularization?
Your second premise was, and that science was secularization?
No.
I'm trying to see what the three premises are.
That's what I'm asking you.
I mean, the three statements.
So that's what I'm asking you.
So science, sounded like you said all that science was secularization?
Ideas of enlightenment. I'm talking about enlightenment. That's what the paper is about.
Right, so
The
your
Enlightenment
first,
period.
your first statement is all the ideas of the Enlightenment of the 18th century
Goes back to one
goes
thing,
back to science.
or it was
So-
called secularization.
Right, so that's not an argument yet, that's a statement.
Okay.
Right.
So that's a statement.
By the way, some of your term papers might not be arguments. Remember, history, a history or a narrative basically can just be a description of things and not an argument.
Oh. All right. I was just trying to see if it fit in there.
Well, you would need a conclusion. Maybe this is your conclusion. We'll think about it. Okay, let's pick another one. Anybody have a favorite mood? What's your favorite mood? It's a fun.
That's it.
Be happy. So HAPP. Why? Well, that's not a syllogism.
Secularization
Yeah.
is like
Different mood.
explain.
EEE? Oh.
Explain
We haven't used O.
the church and state.
We haven't used an O yet.
In 1500. So secularization came
AEO?
about, and it gave people a new voice for
There's
things
like,
that
oh,
were happening
that's weird to
in the
ask.
universe that others.
That's why it was funny. What's your favorite mood?
I was gonna say
So off of
angry,
the
but not
off
because of
of
that.
Angry?
secularization,
Yeah.
the enlightenment
What color are your
period
eyes?
Thus you have
You don't know what
You
color
change
you're on?
colors,
They-
they're
they
green.
got
Oh, that is a color.
Yeah.
It's the same as my wife's. They change colors depending on when she's angry
business
or not.
from this one idea.
So AEO, pick a figure then. 1, 2, 3, or 4. 3? AEO 3. Okay, so wait, I have
With the church and
all statement, right? Followed by a no statement, followed by a sum. And the conclusion, of course, is where I get my S and P. So sum S is, and this is an O statement, so is not P, right? And the figure is figure 3, which means figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. So the two M's will be in this arrangement. No, wait. Nope, this one. Right, 1, 2, right. You were right, Chris.
Yeah. It's to the left side.
Right, left. Oh, I was right. I was right, it was left. There we go. Okay. So all M is P, no M is S, some S is not P, right? We can fill in for this. What would you like? What should I make the middle term be? Marines. That's what Marines are. All Marines are people. No Marine is, we can't say sailor, because they are sailors. Silly. So some silly folks are not people. Whoa, that's weird. Some silly folks are not people. I don't know. Could be puppets. You know, they're silly, but they're not people. So all Marines are people. No Marines are silly. Some silly things are not people. Okay. So let's diagram it. middle term are marines. My minor term is silly things. And my major term are people. So all marines are people. So all marines, all of these have to also be in here. So there are no marines up in this section. No marines are silly things. No marines are silly things, so there are no members here. So my conclusion, some silly things are not people. I would have to have an X here, and I don't. So this is invalid. And why is it invalid? Let's see. This is distributed, this is undistributed, this is distributed, this is distributed, this is distributed, this is undistributed. Oh, backwards. Because this is a no statement, so this is undistributed, this is distributed. Okay. So people are distributed, whereas here, the only place where people occur in the argument, it's undistributed. So I'm expecting to know more information about people in the conclusion than is given in the premise. So this is considered illicit. Can't do it, right? And because it's the major term, it's referred to as illicit major. So it breaks the rule for a valid syllogism that's called illicit major. And by the way, in the Boolean system, we also have a problem because this is a universal premise, and this is a universal premise, but this is a particular premise. So we have the problem, which, in that other sense, would be the existential fallacy. Existential fallacy. Notice if we look at the rules, page 254, the existential fallacy, a formal fallacy that occurs when a categorical syllogism has a particular conclusion and two universal premises. Right? But that is the Boolean situation. But in any case, that particular argument form is invalid. And if you look at the list on page 246, under figure 3, right, the third column over, and we look down AEO, notice that none of them are formed with AE, let alone AEO. There is an EAO3. Let's do EAO3 and see what we get. EAO3, right? So I'll start off with a no statement, an all statement, and a sum S are not P. Since it's figure 3, 1, 2, 3. So no M is P. is P. All M is S. So some S are not P. Some S are not P. So notice in Aristotle's system, you have to have some members of S right there. And they are not P. So for Aristotle, some S are not P is a valid form. But for the Boolean system, it's not. Because this is the existential fallacy. I have two universal premises, but I have an existential conclusion. So, and by the way, this is exactly how I'm going to do these on the test. I'm going to give you, 15 different syllogisms. I'll just basically give you, say, like, E, I, 2, O, A, O, 4, et cetera, right? So I'll just have 15 or so of those. And what you have to do is write them out, diagram them, figure out if they're valid or invalid, and if they're invalid, say what rules they broke. See how that works? So in other words, you're doing precisely what I'm doing. Does that make sense? So in this particular case, what you would be saying is it is valid for Aristotle in the traditional sense, but in the modern tradition, rather than traditional, you're looking at an invalid argument. So if we were arguing about things that clearly exist, we're not going to have a problem with it. But if we're talking about abstract, non-existing entities, then you're going to have a problem. So who else has a favorite mood? Who would like to do one? Would you like to come up to the board and do one? Some people like to do them, other people don't. No, nobody wants to do it. How about do you have a piece of paper? You know that white stuff that we slice out of trees somehow? So do 8002.
put all M or P.
Figure 1 goes like this. Figure 2 is like this. Figure 3. Oh, the figure, by the way, is given to you on that pattern. It's on the top of page 245. Uh-oh. All P is M, no members of P down here. Some S is not M. So it means it's here. It's very clear. So therefore, some S is not P, and there it is. So that's a valid form. Which, notice I took 8002, I took off of valid list. Morocco? Did you have any?
When it says all P is M, how come P and M are not sharing in that diagram up there? Cause P is in M.
All P is in M, right? So here's P.
But wouldn't P also be up there in M too, right?
Well, so what I have is this diagram here. I'm saying P is M, right? So all P is M.
You leave out that middle part?
This is where there's nothing.
Oh, it's removing it.
Right.
It's not including.
Filling in is showing where it's blank.
Okay, I thought it was including it.
It's just the opposite of statistics. If you took
That's what I'm
statistics,
thinking, right, cause I just had that. Okay,
we do that so that we could drive you crazy.
right. Cause in that way, we're including all the data. Here, we're removing it.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
That's part of our plot, to drive students
It's
crazy, so that
totally
you can
opposite.
never graduate. You know,
I
you'll always
just
be.
wired my brain one way, now I
Yeah, I
gotta
figure this
rewire
is a
it.
great way for us to make sure that students keep going forever,
Right,
so that we don't lose our students, because
okay.
then we'll be out of work.
So I do everything the opposite that makes sense for me.
Exactly.
Okay,
Now that we've got your mind acutely tuned to fill in, this is where all the members are.
right,
And we have a class, and
we're removing it.
there's no members in this section here.
Right. Okay,
And so if you take this, turn it like this, you see that it's confusing when we go from the double diagram to the triple diagram, is you've got these overlapping sections here that you have to figure, well, wait a minute. Does my statement tell me whether it's in here or here? No, it doesn't. Of course, in this particular case, it turned out not to be necessary, because this worked out perfectly. So I have, and there's one that is in S, but it's not in P. So if I fill this in as you know, say an argument, let's see, all Pacific Islanders are married. Some Wakinis, I don't know how to spell Wakinis, right? That's women in Hawaiian, right? Are not married. Therefore, some Wakinis are not Pacific Islanders. Well, that could be because Waikinis can also be women who are not native Hawaiians. So if you're in Hawaii and you see a woman who's a grump, right? She's not a Pacific Islander. Because Wakinis are always, I mean, the native Hawaiians, those women, they're always happy, aren't they?
Just to be clear, where it's filled in, there's nothing there. Where the X is, that's where we know for sure one is.
Yes. Right, and now notice, this chapter doesn't help you with that. To know how that works, you have to go back to page 198. And 197. And page 190. They're actually all the same, right? It's just that you're looking at the implications under the Boolean system as opposed to the Aristotelian or traditional system. So yeah, these two chapters go together. To see what I'm doing here, you have to already feel very, very comfortable with the previous chapter 5, and then chapter 6 puts the syllogism together, right? But what I'm doing is obviously, and rules and fallacies. We'll continue working on this, but let's do one for a quiz question for the evening. How about AII3? AII3. I'll put that on the blog. Already put it in today. So, you know, extend it out, right? So I have an A statement, an I statement, and an I statement. Figure 3 means I have to figure out where my middle term and my major term and minor terms go. And the conclusion will always be SP, so always a minor or major. So, does this look doable? Did I confuse anybody the way I did this, or is this, unless you've already had, of course, statistics, which, as you can see, it lends itself beautifully to your being confused for the rest of your life.
Right, well, I'll have to work on that tonight.
I know my question might sound dumb, but if I could ask some type of question, I'd be really right.
All right, Professor. Have a good day.
Okay, but when I'm older, we'll be able to. I will never work with it. See how it's easy.
Most people, I think, that have trouble with it overthink it.
I'm trying to just see it in the common sense way, like if all ice cream is chocolate, all chocolate is ice cream.
Well, but
No,
not
no,
all.
no, that's just inclusive, that's not a valid argument. On the one I did, I said all friends, let's see, on this one I said, all friends are girls, some girls are not blonde,
All friends
Are girls.
are girls.
some girls are not blonde,
Some girls are not blonde.
some blondes are not friends.
Some
Would that be right, or am I, could,
blondes are not,
not,
not friends. Okay, the one thing I see immediately though is we should have it arranged this way. Because you have the, so this is, so this is the predicate of the conclusion, this is your major term here, is friends,
right, right.
right? And girls then becomes the middle term. And blondes turns out to be the, wait.
I get confused,
Wait a
which
minute.
is the subject and,
Some blondes, no, so you had it right, let me see. So some girls are not blonde, right?
the first one was some girls are friends. Let me read this
What?
again.
Oh,
It says,
so that we
so
start-
it was going to the AOO statement.
Uh-huh.
All friends are girls.
So all friends are girls.
Some girls are not blonde.
Blonde.
And then some blondes are not friends.
So AOO2, right?
Right.
But girls is the middle term, and it's in this shape, it's figure 4, so you have AOO figure 4.
So
We
that
wanted figure 2.
M stands for middle term.
Right.
The P is the premises, right? Premise?
You could say P is premise, but P would be also, so what happens is we say S and P from the first chapter, chapter 5, we say, okay, so we have 4 types of statements, SP, right? All S are P, no S or P, some S are P, some S are not P, right? So you get subject, predicate, subject, predicate, subject, predicate, right?
Right.
Then we go into this chapter and we say, okay, now we're going to diagram whole arguments. And the subject predicate will be used as the conclusion. But then for the other 2 statements, you can have the predicate on either side and the subject on either side, because now this becomes the major term and this becomes the minor term.
Right,
And in these 2 statements, they can be swapped either way.
right.
So it becomes very confusing. And then we throw in, okay, and now we have the middle term, which has to be, so in figure AOO2, right, in AOO2, or, yeah, AOO2 is the one I just
Yeah,
assigned, right?
right.
So in AOO2, I would have an A statement. Some are not, some S are not P. And it's figure 2, so 1, 2. this is not. It's very hard to remember. Some
Mhm.
S is not M. Okay, so that's my A002 arrangement, right? Now, if I want to go in and say, so some blondes are not friends?
Right.
Some blondes are not friends. Right? So friends has to be here.
And then
then
M was,
blondes.
M was girls, I think. Some friends are girls.
So all friends are girls. Some blondes are not girls.
So there's blonde guys.
Yeah. Some blondes are not friends.
Which would be the blonde guys, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I need to work on the figuring out what the P, M, and S is. PMS. Okay.
Yeah, well, we'll do more.
Yeah.
We're actually ahead of the game at this point
Right.
because I started the chapter early.
I'm so glad I asked about
Yes.
I've been focused more on the notes than in the book, and I didn't really understand that X part, but, okay, so I just got out of statistics, so we color in everything that's included in the data, and
You're in statistics still?
no, I just got out of it. I got a
That was
B in it,
last
so
semester.
I did okay.
Yeah, you
But
did.
I almost,
You'll do okay. If you've got a B in statistics, you should ace this because this is 101. This is
my son Jesse, he really liked you, he really liked the class, and he goes, if you use common sense, you'll get it. He goes, it actually gets fun, because he said they do like a code, they have little codes and they have to decipher. And he goes, it gets really fun, you'll really enjoy it. And I said, well, I really like the professor, but this I have to work on.
well. I introduced the whole thing at once because that's the way it makes sense
Yeah.
to me.
Oh, it
But-
definitely,
but-
it's better to catch it all at once than to divvy it out, because then we're gonna go, oh boy, now we got something new to grab.